Hello friends, I'm Mark Moore. I'm the author of the book, Early Genesis, The Revealed Cosmology, and a part of that book talks about what is Genesis, and specifically it talks about a modified version of the tablet theory, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. Because there's a lot of controversy about Genesis. It has been under attack, like so much of the Word of God is. There's three views of where Genesis came from. Of course, the fundamentalist view is that basically Moses was in his tent and he might not have even known about his family history and what have you, but that he was inspired by the Holy Spirit and he wrote it out from a blank slate. And maybe some scribes might have did some touch-ups here and there. For instance, if we were translating a document today and it had the word Persia in it, we might translate it and change the word to Iran because that is the name of the country now. So, place names might have been changed. There might have been some clarification notes. The scribes might have put some polish on the apple, but basically the apple was Moses and his writing. And then opposed to that, there is the secular view of it, or the documentary hypothesis. And what it says is that Moses didn't write that. Maybe there was some Mosaic core somewhere, but not an apple. What they say is that many centuries after Moses, scribes and priests took a bunch of stories they had heard, maybe from when they were in Babylon, and they basically forged it. They put Moses' name on it and said he wrote it just to give it more credibility, just to give the stories they have more credibility. And they point to inconsistencies in the text as far as what kind of syntax is used, what kind of vocabulary is used, what style of writing is used. And so they have, this was written by unknown author J because it has this trait, and this was written by P because it has this trait, and they pick it apart basically. Now, the third view is the least known view, but in my mind it is by far the strongest view of early Genesis and what early Genesis is, and that is the tablet theory. But the common tablet theory that's out there has a couple of little weaknesses in it, and I believe you need to modify that tablet theory before it really clicks and fits what we see in early Genesis. And what the tablet theory is saying is, yes, Genesis was written by Moses, but he didn't start with a blank slate. He had help. He had a series of tablets, and these tablets were inherited. They were passed down the generations from his ancestors, from some of the patriarchs even in the Bible. So it doesn't even rule out that they're inspired writings. And in fact, the secular scholars hate the tablet theory because it's just too glorious. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that as we go into it. But what makes me think that the tablet theory is accurate? In the early 1900s, there was a military attaché. His name was Wiseman, and he was attached to some archaeological digs in Mesopotamia, which is Babylon. It's where Abraham came from originally, and the tablets they were digging up were from antiquity. They were from the days of Abraham, maybe even before. So they kept finding a phrase in these tablets, and the phrase was the same words in Hebrew that is mentioned 11 times in Genesis, 12 perhaps, a modified form of it. These are the generations of. Now some of you have read Genesis. Perhaps that phrase, these are the generations of, is familiar to you. You know it's said many times. And sometimes, but not always, this phrase comes before some type of genealogy, a listing of ancestors. And so the way we've translated it, the way we've thought of it is, these are the generations of, they're warning you that they're about to give you a genealogy, which follows this phrase. And the word, the generations there, it does have connotations of giving birth. It's producing, it's creating, including in the sense of birthing. But now I can tell you though, as a writer, that's just how I feel about the things I've written. I'm producing, I'm creating, it's my baby, so to speak. And so what Wiseman found out was that the phrase the same phrase they were finding on those tablets, it didn't mean genealogy. It meant, necessarily, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. It meant, this is the account of. But this phrase, these are the generations of, was not at the beginning of those accounts. It was at the end of the accounts. And it served for what we would today call a colophon. You go in books and it says, this is the title of the book, this is who the publisher is, this is who the writer is, and it makes some identification about where that happened in time. And usually today the colophon is near the front of the book. But in times past, even in English and Western culture, it was in the back of the book. And what he was saying was this phrase was at the end of these tablets. And it was referring to the material preceding it, not referring to the material that was after it, as we thought when we read these deals. And so the tablet theory said that there was a series of these tablets, and when we see this phrase, it's talking about the material in front of it and not behind it. Now, in some cases, that made sense. It made sense, the material, because really there's not always a genealogy next to this phrase. Sometimes there is a lot, but sometimes there isn't. And also, you could make the case it's talking about the material before. However, and Wiseman's son actually became an archaeologist, I believe, at Oxford. I mean, he was a big time guy, and he would just republish his father's work basically without any changes. So he thought it was credible. Then there was a fellow, R.K. Harrison. He gave credence to the tablet theory in his book on Genesis. And so this idea has always been bubbling around out there, but there's been problems with it. One of the problems is they're just so often associated with a genealogy, and if you put his formula too tightly, if you adhere to it too tightly, it's got Ishmael telling the story of Isaac, or it's got Esau telling the story of Jacob when you look at their order. And so what I would like to propose to you, and I'll go very briefly, is a modified tablet theory. You go to the different places. For example, early in Genesis, the accounts are the heavens and the earth and Adam. These are the generations of, these are the generations of. And it says in chapter 5 of Genesis that these accounts are part of what they call the book of Adam. And what I'm suggesting is Adam compiled these two different accounts, one in his own name, and they became the book of Adam. And then Noah came along, and Noah, and this is what is different, and this is what they found after Wiseman's day. Sometimes these tablets, they wouldn't always have the colophon on the bottom. Sometimes the tablets would be two-sided. And so they'd have maybe a genealogy on one side and a narrative on the other side. And if they were, particularly if they were stored on shelves, the colophon, which would say this is the account of so-and-so, son of Obed, or he had Obed and Achmed as his sons, sometimes that was even on the edge. So it would be in the middle of the account. If you were translating, if you were transcribing, and Moses, of course, got the Ten Commandments on tablets. When he busted them, God sent him up again to hew out more tablets and put them on there. Why? He had papyrus. He knew how to write. He had more advanced mediums to put things on. It's because they were used to receiving sacred communications in the form of tablets. And that fits right in with the tablet theory. But here we have a situation where on one side of Noah's tablet, the account of Noah, he traces his line from Adam to his own family. And then on the other side, he talks about how wicked the world is. And Moses had this tablet. Which side do you put first? Well, it seemed like Moses was trying to, or Noah rather, was trying to make this an addendum to the book of Adam anyway, the way he put it. And so Moses just put the account of the genealogies right at the end of the account of Adam, because it was like an addendum. And then the narrative about how wicked the earth was, the first 11 verses of chapter 6. Now, another thing Wiseman found, that sometimes the break between tablets, they would simply repeat the line. Like the last line of one tablet would be the first line of the next tablet. And that's how you know, okay, these tablets, that's the next page in the story. And Genesis chapter 6 verse 11 and Genesis chapter 6 verse 12 bear indications that that is what's going on here. They're basically repeating itself right there. And so what I'm saying is he had a tablet, and it may have been recopied a couple of times, but it was the account of Noah, and it was a tablet that had two sides on it. One was the genealogy, the other was his narrative about how wicked the world was, and on the edge it had, these are the generations of Noah. And so it ended at 611. But then there was another tablet, that of his sons, and also their tablet, which told the story of the flood from 612 on. This is the tablet of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem, Ham, and Japheth's descendants, they did kind of the same thing that Noah did with Adam. They kept, only they did it by families. This is the Table of Nations. The Table of Nations is designed sort of as an addendum to the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And there's even a little bit of a semi-Toledah or colophon in there in Genesis chapter 10, verse 32. And so that's what you have there. You have this tablet, the Shem, Ham, and Japheth tablet, the story of the flood on one side, what became of them on the other. So then you have the Terah tablet, and on one side is a genealogy, and the other side is the very short and sad account of Terah's life. Now normally, unless of course you're Adam, your story is told by your sons. Your story is told by your sons in this culture. But here we don't see that. And matter of fact, we don't see anywhere, this is the account of Abraham. Now, this means to me a couple things. One, the documentary hypothesis is all wet. If they were priests that were forging things in the name of Moses, they would put, these are the generations of Abraham, and give the father of their people, he would get his account in there as well. They didn't do that. If you'll read, though, the account of Terah, which is right after the genealogy tracing the descent from Shem to Terah, and it bears the account, it bears signs of being written by somebody that lived after him. In other words, I think Abraham did write this account, but he did not want to put his name on it because as of the time his father died, nothing good happened in that account, and number two, he had no children at that time. And so if he had put his name on it, the account may just, he would think in his mind, it just ends right here. There's no going on. I'm going to put it in my father's account, and hopefully my nephew Lot or somebody will take it up from there. In other words, Lot was a direct descendant of Terah, and so he could continue the tradition. Abraham was not sure that he could, so he kept his father's name on the account. So the genealogy from Shem to Terah, that is one part of the Terah tablet, which was probably compiled by Terah. But then his sad story compiled by Abraham, he left in Terah's name. Now, let's move on. There's just two large accounts to end this. It ends in 36, 37. We don't see this phrase, these are the generations of, show up anymore after the beginning of 37. Why is that? Well, because they change cultures. They're not in Mesopotamia anymore. They're in Egypt now. They're in Palestine now. They have different culture. They have different writing mediums. They use scrolls. They use papyrus. They use parchments. So, because that changed, this habit of doing things like that changed. These were old records that Moses got. They hadn't done things like this for a long time. So, it ends there, but again, one of the problems with too inflexibly applying the tablet theory is that Ishmael is supposed to tell the story of Isaac, see, and then Esau is supposed to tell the story of Jacob. I don't think that's what's happening in either of these cases. Instead, with both of these accounts, where Ishmael and Isaac tell the story of Abraham, and Esau and Jacob tell the story of what happened both to them and to other things, I think what's happening here is there is a double colophon. There is a double Toledah. And because in both these cases you have something very similar. Think about Isaac and Ishmael. I think Isaac wrote the account. He was the favorite of Abraham. But here he is young, he is weak. Ishmael is powerful and warlike, and his neighbor. Now, already he's probably upset that you kind of usurped his birthright. That, he was the main guy, and now you come along later and you're the main guy. So now you're writing the story of their father, which is usually the job of the oldest. Maybe they had the place of honor. So Isaac very diplomatically includes Ishmael in on the story. It's a joint account. They're doing it together. Matter of fact, he gives Ishmael a lot more space than he gives himself when he's doing the colophon, when he's doing the Toledah. And Jacob, he had the same situation. He usurped his brother. His brother was a tough guy. His brother had lots of guys that would flock to his banner for conflict. And he didn't want to usurp. He probably wrote the account, but he wanted to really go overboard and give Esau a lot of space. And so he basically gave him two colophons. He gave him the colophon at the end, where he barely mentions his own self, but he mentions Esau's position a lot. And he also gives him, within the account, there's a smaller account that is a colophon of Esau, which lists all the many princes and all the many, the extensive family that he has, and how wonderful they are, what leaders they are. So he doesn't want trouble with Esau. He's already caused Esau enough trouble. If you look at it like that, Moses had sacred communications in the form of tablets from his ancestors. Most of the case against these writings being genuine and from Moses, they all go away. All the documentary hypothesis and all their little speculation about who J is or P is or what have you, it's actually much more explainable. Yes, it was written by various people, but they were the patriarchs of the Bible. They were people that were from the Lord and of the Lord. So really, the idea that it's not of divine inspiration really takes a hit. If you modify the tablet theory in the way that I've described here, where it doesn't always the Toledah does not always refer to the material before it. Sometimes it refers to the material before it and after it. And there's a couple of joint Toledahs. If you don't just treat them all the same way, tablets that were written and put together over spans of thousands of years, they don't all use the exact same rules. Then it makes a lot more sense. So, Early Genesis, The Revealed Cosmology is the book. See that for more details. I'm going to sign off for this one. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you.